They called it the Land of Light, Persia, where marble shimmered under a sun that seemed to bless its kings. From the gardens of Pasargadae to the jeweled halls of Persepolis, the empire glittered with order and elegance. Silk whispered in corridors perfumed with saffron and rosewater. Scholars debated beneath carved columns, and poets sang of justice flowing like rivers through the land. To every traveler, it looked like civilization perfected, a world where wisdom ruled and beauty obeyed. But beauty was the mask. Behind those mirrored walls, another empire breathed, one of silence and control. Beneath the marble floors lay cells that never saw daylight. The same rulers who built libraries also built prisons. The same priests who praised purity drafted laws that broke women like clay idols. Their elegance was not enlightenment, it was camouflage. In the court of kings, women gleamed like gold coins, traded, hoarded, and discarded. A princess's worth was measured not in her voice, but in her obedience. Behind every banquet lay a bargain. Behind every garden, a grave. In a land that worshipped fire, women were taught to fear its touch. For fire could purify, but it could also erase. And yet, the illusion held. Foreign emissaries bowed before the empire's splendor, never glimpsing the faces hidden behind veils of law and faith. In public, devotion. In private, despair. The empire's greatness was built on symmetry. For every tower that reached heavenward, a body was buried beneath it. Persia's kings called themselves shadows of God, protectors of truth. But truth was what they feared most. Their temples glowed with sacred flame, even as they extinguished the light in countless souls. The philosophers wrote of cosmic balance, of Asha, order and harmony. Yet their justice demanded suffering, their peace required silence. The empire perfected contrast, beauty and brutality, order and oppression, worship and humiliation. Its stones told one story, the chronicles another. To the world, it appeared divine. To those within, it was a gilded cage. Because behind the brilliance of its art and architecture lay the darkest of trades, the buying and burial of women's lives beneath scripture and decree. So ask yourself, in a world so radiant, what shadows were left unseen? What did beauty cost in an empire ruled by men who feared women more than their enemies? To understand their punishments, we must first understand the laws they were forced to obey. In the empire's eyes, a woman's body was not her own. It was a vessel of purity to be guarded, measured, and judged. Every breath she took was subject to law, every gesture weighed by scripture. The same hands that built empires also wrote decrees that decided when a woman could speak, when she could walk, when she was allowed to be seen. Zoroastrian law called it righteousness, Asha, the cosmic order. To live within it was to serve truth. But truth was defined by men who feared pollution more than injustice. Under their gaze, even noble women were prisoners of ritual. During menstruation, a woman was declared unclean, forbidden from touching water, food, or fire. She could not speak to her husband. She could not touch her children. For days, she would vanish, not in death, but in exile within her own home. It was said that impurity could spread through a glance, that if a woman's eyes met those of the wrong man, his soul might be stained, and so veils became prisons of fabric. Words became dangerous. A single misstep, a moment of defiance could summon the priests. They came not with swords, but with silence. The records speak of a chamber called Vara, the house of confinement, a small, windowless room where accused women were locked away for days, sometimes months, to purify their souls. They were given no mirrors, for reflection was considered vanity. They were forbidden to speak, for words were deemed contagious. Servants would slide food through cracks in the door, their eyes averted. It wasn't torture in the way we imagine. It was worse. It was the deliberate crafting of absence, a punishment that erased sound, warmth, and time itself. Imagine the terror. Knowing your servants could accuse you, your husband could condemn you, your purity determined by invisible rules written in the language of fear. Even queens lived at the mercy of ritual. Behind their jewels and guards, they counted their words like coins, careful never to overspend. The empire's control wasn't maintained through chains or whips, but through a subtler weapon, the belief that obedience was holiness. Women learned to censor their laughter, to hide their thoughts behind polite silence. Generation after generation, that silence calcified into virtue. And when outsiders praised the empire's discipline, they never saw the faces behind its stillness. The women who lived their lives on the edge of accusation. Because in Persia, silence wasn't peace. It was punishment perfected, but for those who dared to defy these laws, the punishment wasn't just silence, it was spectacle. They called it justice. But in truth, it was theater. When the empire wished to remind its people who ruled the body and the soul, it built a stage, a courtyard, a market square, a temple gate, anywhere the crowd could gather. The punishments were not hidden behind walls. They were performed beneath the open sky, wrapped in ceremony. To the priests, it was purification. To the people, it was warning. To the condemned, it was the end of language itself. Herodotus wrote of Persian punishments with horror and awe. Women accused of treason or adultery were not simply executed. They were displayed, bound in silks, painted in gold, their beauty preserved for one final humiliation. Then the sentence would fall. Impalement, burial, or dismemberment, carried out with ritual precision. The empire did not kill in haste. It choreographed. One chronicle describes a noblewoman accused of betrayal, forced to stand before the temple of Anahita, the goddess of purity. She was draped in ceremonial jewels, her wrists tied with ribbons of crimson. The priest declared her soul corrupted. The crowd watched as she was lowered into the ground alive, soil closing over her like the lid of a sarcophagus. They called it sacrifice, a cleansing of impurity through the return of flesh to earth. Others were paraded through cities on gilded litters, their crimes announced by royal heralds. Adulteress, blasphemer, defiler. Some were flogged until the silk clung red to their skin. Some were made to wear golden masks, their faces frozen in an eternal smile, a grotesque parody of grace. The punishments became stories. The stories became law. The cruelty wasn't chaos. It was architecture, deliberate, measured, efficient. Each execution reaffirmed the empire's symmetry, order above, suffering below. By making pain beautiful, the rulers turned obedience into instinct. The people learned not just to fear, but to watch. And that was the deepest horror, because every punishment required an audience. Mothers brought their sons. Servants whispered the sentences to those too afraid to look. The silence of the crowd became the foundation of control. The empire did not need to kill everyone who sinned. It only needed witnesses who would not speak. Even the condemned understood their role. As the earth closed over them, or the spear rose from beneath their ribs, they became symbols. The body transformed into a message. The empire taught that purity demanded spectacle, that blood was a necessary offering to keep the world in balance. Centuries later, when foreign historians wrote of Persian grandeur, the roads, the palaces, the laws, they did not see the blood beneath the stones. But those who lived it remembered. The market squares where laughter turned to screams, the temple courtyards where gold and death glimmered together in the sun. For the empire, cruelty was not a failure of morality. It was a performance of power, a ritual that reminded every citizen of their place. And what happened when they forgot it? But what happened to those whose crimes couldn't be seen? The women punished not for actions, but for emotions. In the empire of masks and laws, there was one crime more dangerous than treason: love. For a woman, to love outside the boundaries drawn by her king or her god was to invite ruin. Not swift death, but a slower kind. The kind that began with whispers and ended in silence. Affection was not affection, it was defiance. Desire was not human, it was heresy. History remembers Queen Amestris, wife of Xerxes, as both victim and monster. The chronicles say she mutilated her husband's lovers, cutting away beauty piece by piece in jealous rage. But look closer, and you see something far more tragic. A woman raised in a court where worth was measured by the king's gaze, where love was rationed, where jealousy was both forbidden and inevitable. Her cruelty was the reflection of her fear, the terror of becoming invisible. Even queens trembled in their palaces. A smile from the wrong servant could be treachery. A glance too long could breed suspicion. The same king who once swore eternal affection could, in a single moment, have a lover sent to the quiet house, where her mind would dissolve in solitude. Concubines lived in gilded cages, their fates dependent on whims disguised as divine will. One forgotten in the rotation of favor would slowly fade, her name erased from records, her body buried without title. Another might be kept alive, not for pleasure, but as a warning, her face hidden, her presence a living ghost of disobedience. In Persia, love was politics, and politics was war. The chambers of the harem were not places of leisure, but of strategy. Every gesture was calculation, every silence, survival. Even kindness could be dangerous, for the walls had ears, and the empire had a talent for turning emotions into evidence. It was a paradox that devoured them all. The more loyal a woman became, the more the empire feared her influence. Love, in its purest form, became rebellion, because it created allegiance stronger than law. And in a world built on obedience, there was no greater threat. A mistress may have ruled with fear, but she was ruled by it as well. Each night, she slept beside the man who could end her with a word. Each dawn, she rose to ensure no one replaced her by dusk. Her power was real, but it was also a prison. In the end, the empire proved one truth: even queens could not survive the paranoia of kings. But emotional defiance was nothing compared to what awaited those who broke sacred vows, for they were not merely punished, they were erased. They said fire was holy and the purest bridge between heaven and earth. In Persia's temples, sacred flames burned without end, tended by priests who spoke of Asha, the divine order that kept the cosmos aligned. To live within Asha was to live in truth. To fall into Druj, the lie, the chaos, was to be consumed. And when a woman disobeyed, they said she carried the mark of Druj. Her destruction was not called death. It was called purification. In the empire's eyes, this was mercy. To cleanse the world of her falsehood, to restore balance through her suffering. So the priests lit the pyres with ritual precision. They whispered prayers to the flame, thanking it for accepting the impure. The women burned not as criminals, but as offerings, sacrifices to the illusion of order. But fire does not purify lies. It only silences voices. The chronicles speak little of these burnings. Most were never recorded. The empire learned that the truest form of punishment wasn't the spectacle of pain. It was the quiet deletion that followed. Once the smoke rose, scribes would be summoned, the royal archives would open, and the erasure would begin. In one dimly lit chamber, a royal scribe kneels before a slab of stone. Upon it is carved the name of a queen, her title, her lineage, her triumphs. The command is simple: strike her out. He takes the chisel, hesitates for a breath, then scrapes. The sound, stone grinding against stone, echoes like a funeral hymn. Bit by bit, her name disappears, leaving only scars in the marble. Elsewhere, manuscripts are edited. A single brushstroke turns her name into dust. Paintings are altered, her image replaced by a faceless figure. Courtiers are ordered never to speak of her again. Her jewelry is melted, her rooms sealed, her existence dissolved into absence. Within weeks, it is as if she never lived. This was the empire's most perfect cruelty, the killing of memory. To die was to join ancestors, but to be forgotten was to lose eternity. The priest preached that women who fell to Druj could not be remembered, for memory was sacred, and corruption could not share the same breath as holiness. It sounded divine, but it was a theology of fear, a weapon forged from scripture. Each erased name was another lesson to the living. Your soul exists only by permission. Even centuries later, when archaeologists unearthed blank stones and faceless reliefs, they wondered, who was meant to be there? Whose likeness was scraped away by trembling hands? Each scar in stone whispered the same truth. The empire's obsession with purity devoured its own history, and so fire became both temple and tomb. The women condemned as liars were not only burned from life, but from legacy. Their ashes mingled with incense, their names dissolved into silence. To die was mercy. To be forgotten was the true punishment. But erasure only fed the whispers, and the empire feared whispers more than swords. For every law carved in stone, there was a whisper carved in breath. When the empire silenced its women, the silence itself began to speak. Beneath the marble floors, beyond the courtyards where fire burned in judgment, another language bloomed, soft, hidden, and alive. It moved through kitchens and corridors, carried by the ones the empire never noticed. Servants, midwives, slaves. They became the keepers of forbidden memory, turning pain into story, loss into lullaby. They could not write, so they sang. Their songs hid names like seeds buried beneath soil. A lullaby about a weeping fig tree was really about a queen who vanished. A bedtime tale of a serpent devouring the sun was a memory of a girl burned for defiance. Each story passed from mother to daughter, reshaped by voice but never by meaning. What the empire erased from stone, women preserved in sound. In the candlelight of kitchens, an old midwife would murmur, "Do you hear her?" meaning the one who cursed the king. Legend said she was nameless, a wife condemned for defying his order. On the day of her execution, as soldiers dragged her to the temple gate, she spat at the steps and whispered, "May your sons remember me in their dreams, and may your gods choke on their silence." The priest said her curse was nonsense. Yet for generations, palace children woke screaming from dreams of burning gardens and unseen voices calling their names. Her words survived where her body did not, carried through centuries like smoke that refused to fade. It was through these whispers that the erased found resurrection. They lived in lullabies, in proverbs, in myths told by candlelight. The empire's chronicles wrote of kings and wars, but the kitchens and wells remembered the women, not as saints or martyrs, but as warnings and ghosts. That was their quiet rebellion. Memory became a weapon no law could outlaw. For every record destroyed, a story survived in the mouths of those forbidden to speak. Even now, some of those songs still echo. Nameless tunes in forgotten dialects, carrying the rhythm of grief and defiance. They are faint, but they are still alive. Yet the empire did not learn. As its palaces crumbled, its cruelty evolved, changing masks, but never dying. In the end, the empire did not fall to foreign armies. It fell to itself. For centuries, Persia had ruled through fear disguised as faith, control wrapped in virtue. But the same system that silenced its women also suffocated its kings. Paranoia, once turned outward, began to feed inward, a serpent consuming its own tail. Every law meant to preserve purity became a weapon of suspicion. Every priest became an accuser. Every royal household, a nest of eyes and ears. The obsession with order fractured into chaos. Temples competed with palaces. Generals whispered against kings. Families denounced one another to prove their righteousness. The fear that once kept women in chains began to haunt the men who forged them. A single rumor, a dream interpreted wrongly, a gesture mistaken for defiance, could doom a noble as easily as a servant. The empire had built its power on purity, but purity cannot sustain life. It can only sterilize it. And so, one by one, its rulers learned the taste of their own medicine. Some of the same kings who condemned women to be buried alive were themselves strangled in their sleep, by wives, by concubines, by servants who had memorized every scream they had ever caused. The chronicles, careful as ever, call these deaths accidents or divine justice. But the truth lingers in the margins. Vengeance, long silent, finally spoke. In one palace, a young queen slipped poison into her husband's wine, not for power, but for release. In another, a servant plunged a blade into the heart of a general who had once branded her sister as impure. These were not revolutions. They were echoes. The empire that silenced women died screaming in the dark. As centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell under the same shadow. Each claimed to restore Asher, to cleanse corruption, to bring divine order back to earth. Yet every new ruler repeated the same ritual of fear, purging rivals, rewriting truths, burning histories. By the time the last embers of the old empire cooled, its temples were ruins and its gods forgotten. But its cruelty remained, not as law, but as instinct. In the empty halls of Persepolis, where gold once glowed and kings once ruled, only the wind remembers the sound of confession. The empire's monuments still stand, their carvings half erased, their silence complete. But if you listen long enough, you might hear what the stones cannot hide, the echo of 1,000 voices once forbidden to speak. And yet, even as the empire's bones turned to dust, its methods survived. In the modern world's quieter prisons, the empire is gone. Its palaces are dust, its gods forgotten, its kings reduced to footnotes. And yet, we still live among its shadows, because what the empire built was never just stone and gold. It built habits, reflexes, invisible walls inside the human mind. The rituals of control have changed their language, but not their purpose. Where once priests whispered of purity, we now speak of reputation. Where once women were buried in the earth, they are now buried beneath judgment, dressed as tradition, morality, or honor. We scroll through glowing screens instead of royal edicts, yet the logic remains the same. To watch, to measure, to silence. The empire learned long ago that it didn't need swords to control a body, only shame. And that shame survives us, inherited like blood. The women who once sang forbidden names in whispers still exist, in every artist censored, every survivor disbelieved, every truth rewritten to protect power. The tools are modern, but the fear is ancient. It hums beneath our daily life, in the rules about how one should speak, dress, behave, forgive. Each is a descendant of that same doctrine, the fear of chaos disguised as virtue. Even the empires of today, digital, political, cultural, repeat the same choreography. A woman speaks, and the world questions her tone. She rises, and the world calls her ungrateful. She resists, and the world brands her dangerous. Different altars, same sacrifice. We tell ourselves we are free because the ruins are far behind us. But the ruins are not behind us. They are beneath us. Every society builds itself over the bones of those it silenced. Every progress carries the echo of what it buried. And so the story circles back, as it always does. From marble halls to modern screens, from royal decrees to viral shame, the stage changes, but the script of control remains. The same fear that built the empire still hides beneath our skin, whispering that truth is dangerous when spoken by a woman. Empires fall, but the fear of a woman's truth survives the ruins,